Vampire hunting. In the darkness of the night, Ravenwood seemed a place cut off from the world. The town was hidden under the cover of dense forests that surrounded it, like the walls of an ancient fortress. The narrow streets were paved with cobblestones, and they were lit only by dim lanterns, the light of which barely broke through the thick fog. The houses stood silent witnesses to events, with their closed shutters and cracked facades that told of times gone by. Even the winds that blew between the old trees seemed to whisper sinister stories. In this town, it seemed that the shadows lived a life of their own, dancing in every corner and creating the feeling of an invisible observer. The air was permeated with fear that was difficult not to feel. The residents who once gathered together for evening gatherings were now hiding in their homes. At sunset, life in Ravenwood froze. The locked doors, the drawn curtains, and the silence all spoke of one thing. They were afraid. This was Ravenwood, a town where darkness lurked, not only in the night sky, but also in the hearts of its people. The inhabitants of Ravenwood were divided between faith and skepticism. Some were sure that the town had become home to a terrible creature, which it was better not to name out loud. Others tried to find a rational explanation for the strange disappearances and eerie sounds that were heard at night. But something unusual was still felt. The atmosphere of the town seemed to have changed, became heavy, as if a fog hung over every house. The local tavern, which had once been the center of social life, now reigned silence. Only a few visitors furtively glanced at each other, afraid to even mention the vampire. There were many rumors about him. Some claimed to have seen a tall figure that quickly disappeared into the shadows. Others said that at night they heard a long whisper or felt a gaze directed at them from the darkness. Especially terrifying were the stories of the old-timers, who recalled that similar things had happened many years ago, when the disappearance of people was also attributed to the vampire. The old legends came to life, adding to the fear of those who listened to them. And although no one had seen the creature with their own eyes, the fear spread faster than any words could convey. Ravenwood lived in tension, and everyone knew deep down that something was lurking in the darkness, even if it was only the shadows of their own fears. Fear settled in the hearts of the inhabitants of Ravenwood, like an invisible but all-pervading enemy. With each new sunset, an almost unknown silence engulfed the town. It seemed that the streets themselves became inhospitable, and the night hid something dangerous. No one dared to walk along the safe, once cozy alleys, where children had played and couples had strolled for years. The change in the behavior of the residents was obvious. Doors that had once been left open for neighbors were now double-locked. Curtains tightly closed the windows, as if protecting the houses from something otherworldly. Night gatherings in the local tavern or in the park became nothing more than a memory of bygone times. No one risked staying outside after sunset. The reality of fear was so tangible that even the animals seemed to feel it. Dogs barely barked at night, and cats hid in secluded corners. The city had lost the sense of community that had united its inhabitants, turning each house into a small fortress. The residents didn't know if what they feared really existed, but every whisper of darkness, every shadow at the edge of their vision, was reason enough to stay home, avoid the risk, and maintain at least the illusion of safety. Victor was what Ravenwood called a legend. His bearing bore witness to the confidence he had gained from years of fighting supernatural beings. Tall, with a sharp gaze that seemed to pierce even the darkest darkness, he made an unforgettable impression. His movements were precise and deliberate, and his words always carried a determination that inspired hope in even the most frightened. Victor's courage was evident not only in his willingness to fight, but also in his inner strength. He did not let fear control him, even when faced with creatures that most people had only heard about in scary stories. His experience was the result of many encounters with werewolves, evil spirits, and even ancient demons. Each of these battles left its mark on Victor, not physical, but spiritual, strengthening his will. Victor's skill was legendary. His crossbow became an extension of his hands, and his wooden stake a symbol of his belief in his mission. He could accurately determine when to attack and when to retreat, using a strategic approach that helped him survive the most dangerous situations. His knowledge of the weaknesses of the creatures of the night made him a master at fighting them. Victor was not just a hunter, he was a defender of those who could not protect themselves. His courage and skill made him the hope of Ravenwood, a man who did not fear the darkness, but used it as a field for victory. For Victor, this was more than just another hunting mission. It was a matter of principle. He saw Ravenwood as more than just a place where another supernatural enemy was hiding. This was a town that deserved peace and quiet, and Victor knew he was the one who could provide it. The residents' stories of fear and constant anticipation of danger touched something deep in his heart. He could not stand to watch people who were locked in their homes, afraid even of their own shadows. For him, it was an injustice he could not accept. He felt a responsibility and duty to use his experience to save people from the darkness that surrounded them. Every time he went on a night patrol, Victor was full of determination. He did not doubt his abilities because he knew that if he did not do it, no one else would dare. His belief in himself and his calling grew stronger with every step he took, with every glance at the deserted streets of Ravenwood. For Victor, the fight against the vampire was more than a battle of good and evil. It was a battle for human dignity, for the right not to live in fear, for the opportunity to bring back the light to Ravenwood. And it was this determination that made him a warrior who could not be stopped by any shadow. The nights in Ravenwood were filled with darkness and silence, broken only by the distant whispers of the wind. But Victor never let this silence fool him. To him, the night was a battlefield where every street, every shadow, and every sound could hide his enemy. Every night, as the town fell asleep, Victor would emerge from his humble base, crossbow in hand and stake securely tucked behind his belt. His steps were almost silent, but his eyes were constantly searching for the slightest sign of movement. He peered intently into the depths of the darkness, searching for any hint of a vampire's presence. Whether it was strange footprints on the ground, shadows that moved too quickly, or even a scent that should not belong to this world. Victor knew that his work was dangerous and exhausting, but his perseverance and discipline would not let him give up. He searched the streets, the squares, the abandoned buildings, every corner of the city where the creature could hide. He even ventured into the dark alleys that seemed to breathe their own sinister energy. Every night brought its own challenges. Sometimes it was a rustling sound from around the corner. Sometimes the discovery of mysterious scratches on the door of one of the houses. But Victor never lost his vigilance. His keen observation, keen instinct, and calm confidence made him a true night watchman of Ravenwood. His patrols were so meticulous that even the smallest detail could not escape his attention. For Victor, every night was a new page in the battle, in which he played the role not only of hunter, but also of defender of the town. It was his persistence that gave Ravenwood a chance for salvation. After several nights of fruitless patrolling, Victor finally came across something that caught his eye. On the very outskirts of Ravenwood stood an old abandoned house that had long become part of urban legend. The townspeople said that the house belonged to a wealthy family that had mysteriously disappeared decades ago. Since then, no one had touched it, and it had gradually fallen into disrepair under the influence of time. The windows of the house were boarded up, and the doors were covered in cobwebs as if nature itself was trying to hide it from prying eyes. Victor could sense something strange in the air around the place, as if it breathed its own dark energy. Despite its appearance, he knew that this house was not as innocent as it seemed. While examining the perimeter of the house, Victor noticed footprints that seemed to lead to an old door in the backyard. The tracks were almost invisible to the naked eye, but Victor, accustomed to noticing the smallest details, saw them immediately. He also noticed an unusual smell, a mixture of damp wood and something more bizarre, reminiscent of metal and blood. This place aroused his suspicion. It was too quiet, even for an abandoned building. The shadows seemed thicker, the silence deeper. His instincts told him that he was getting closer to the entity he was looking for. The old house was the perfect shelter for a vampire trying to hide from the world and sunlight. Victor braced himself for a possible collision, placing his hand on the handle of his crossbow. He knew that a dangerous opponent awaited him inside, but that did not stop him. He was ready. The abandoned house looked as if it had been long forgotten by everyone. The facade was covered with cracks, plaster was flaking off in places, and the roof was crooked, as if the weight of time had weighed too heavily on it. The windows were boarded up with rough wooden boards, already darkened from moisture and old age, and near the door you could see cobwebs that entwined the handle and the threshold. Gray and uninviting, the house seemed alien even in the shade of the dense forest. Victor carefully pushed aside one of the boards that covered the window of the house and peered inside through the crack. What he saw made him tense even more. In the center of the room, half lit by the moonlight, sat a figure. It was a vampire, tall with a pale, almost transparent face. His long, dark hair fell to his shoulders, and his delicate features gave him an ominous, aristocratic look. His eyes were closed, and his hands rested on the armrests of an old chair, as if he were in a state of deep rest. But Victor knew that this was only an appearance. The entity that sat before him was deadly dangerous. Victor, gathering his courage, moved silently to the door of the house. In one sharp movement, he broke the door, shaking the old walls. The vampire opened his eyes in an instant, and their red, piercing glare flashed in the semi-darkness like the glow of hell. He sprang to his feet with incredible speed, his appearance becoming even more menacing. They began to circle towards each other, like shadows competing in the darkness. The vampire attacked with lightning speed, but Victor was ready. He dodged his blows, deftly holding his crossbow at the ready. The tension in the room was palpable, and every move seemed decisive in this deadly duel. The vampire charged forward with lightning speed, leaving a barely visible shadow behind him. His claws flashed in the dim light, aiming for Victor, but he dodged in time, overturning an old table to create a temporary barrier. The vampire's blow shattered the wood, turning it into fragments. Victor wasted no time. He pulled the string of his crossbow and released a bolt in the direction of the enemy. But the vampire was too fast. He dodged, it seemed, even before the arrow had fired. In response, the vampire climbed the wall like a spider and jumped down from above, trying to catch Victor by surprise. The hunter managed to retreat, dodging the attack in time. He swung a wooden stake, trying to hit the creatures hard, but the vampire deflected his blow, rising into the air. Their movements were swift, almost indistinct to the eye, each maneuver betraying incredible skill and experience on both sides. The room had become a chaotic battlefield. The fragments of furniture, the sound of arrows hitting the walls, and the dull noise of the fight created a feeling of a real apocalypse. The vampire attacked constantly. His claws and teeth were an instant threat. But Victor answered him steadfastly, dodging blows and accurately assessing the moment to attack. The fight was long and exhausting. Victor understood that the vampire was faster and stronger than him. But he also noticed that with each passing minute, the enemy began to act less aggressively. Victor guessed that the approaching dawn was gradually weakening the vampire, and this gave him hope. The fight continued, both opponents giving their all. But Victor, hardened in battles, began to notice something unusual in the vampire's behavior. The creature's movements became a little slower, and its attacks less aggressive. The vampire, who had seemed invincible a moment ago, now looked as if his strength was rapidly leaving him. Victor quickly looked up at the old windows, through which the weak rays of dawn were already breaking through. The sun was slowly rising above the horizon, and its light gradually penetrated the room, stretching the shadows and displacing the darkness. For the vampire, this was a deadly challenge. Victor realized that this very natural phenomenon was his best ally in the battle. He began to maneuver so that the sun's rays increasingly filled the room, forcing the vampire to retreat to the farthest corner. With each passing second, his opponent looked weaker, his red eyes fading, and his skin beginning to take on a grayish hue. Dawn is your enemy, Victor thought. He knew that all it would take was a little more patience to force the vampire into an even greater trap. His resolve grew stronger, and he prepared to deliver the final blow. The vampire found himself pressed into the corner of the room, where the shadows could no longer hide his figure from the approaching dawn. His movements became frail, and the strength that had once seemed endless left him with each new ray of sunlight that broke through the cracks in the windows. Victor, taking advantage of this weakness, took decisive aim with his crossbow. The last bolt cut through the air, piercing the vampire's shoulder, and forced him to retreat even closer to the rays. Realizing that the decisive moment had come, Victor grabbed a wooden stake and rushed forward. The vampire desperately tried to defend himself, but he was too weakened. Victor struck the final blow, driving the stake straight into the creature's heart. The vampire rose in a scream that sent a chill through his skin. His body trembled, and in a few moments he crumbled into dust that settled on the wooden floor. The room was silent, only the light of dawn continuing to illuminate the ruins. Victor exhaled slowly, still holding the stake in his hand. He knew that the victory had come at a high price, but now Ravenwood was saved. The fear that had held the town captive dissipated along with the last of the vampire. As he left the abandoned house, Victor looked at the first rays of sunlight, which flooded Ravenwood with a new warm light. It was a reminder that even on the darkest night, dawn always comes.